Okay, so welcome aboard, everyone, and thank you to all of you for joining us for our session 2 on living systems. So this is our first organizing idea that we've unpacked with the new round of the curriculum, the implementation version. And we will be doing Matter before you leave school on June 30th so that you would have both of these completed and can use those for planning in your new year as well. My name is Chris Sarsky. I am one of the consultants with the CARC Consortia, and I have the absolute pleasure of working with a fantastic partner who just stays ahead of everything here in the terminology and all of the maps and things that he creates for you. So welcome and thank you. And I'll get Ted to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ted Zeroni. I'm working with ERLC, currently out of Sherwood Park today. I'd just like to welcome everyone again, and thank you very much for taking the time. I know it's getting close to the end of the year and everyone's busy and has a lot of things on their plate. So we really appreciate your time and hope you find the session this afternoon valuable.
Okay, and I'm going to apologize up front. I'm not working from my usual routine at home here. I'm up north, and so not really sure that I'm going to get all my buttons right here with my tech that I have in front of me, but we'll do the best we can. So with our acknowledgements, we will do as we always have, and that would be that we will try and link some other presentation or a component to it that allows us to share a little bit of the Indigenous perspective before we do the land acknowledgement that links directly to the organizing idea. And so one of our knowledge components that we have within this particular organizing idea is to look at the 4 sacred medicines or plants that First Nations Métis look at and recognize. And so I've selected just the one on tobacco because it is the one that we use the most in the sense of protocol, as far as thanking, especially when you're blessing, if they're doing pipe ceremonies. So it's not that it's any more important than the other 3, but it is the one that people are most familiar with. So I wanted to bring that one to the forefront. So we're just going to watch a bit of that video and then we'll do the land acknowledgement.
How do you use tobacco as a traditional native medicine? Watch this video to find out 5 ways to use native tobacco as a sacred medicine. I'm Mallory Graham, Anishinaabekwa from TribalTradeCo.com. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for new videos every week on the Indigenous culture, Native teachings, and smudging. How do you use tobacco as a medicine? We're here to share these 5 traditional ways to use tobacco as a sacred medicine. We've helped thousands of people find traditional sacred medicines for their unique needs, as well as how to use them, and now it's your turn. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what the top 5 traditional uses of tobacco are. In the Indigenous culture, there are 4 sacred medicines: tobacco, sage, cedar, and sweetgrass. Tobacco, however, is most commonly known for commercial tobacco products. But did you know how important tobacco is for traditional uses in the Indigenous culture? Indigenous people from all over the world have used tobacco for hundreds of years to connect with the Creator, Mother Earth, the spirits, and each other. But why is native tobacco so important? Tobacco is considered the most sacred of the Indigenous sacred medicines. It's used in pretty much every ceremony as a way to connect directly with the Creator. It also is said to be the first medicine to be given to the Anishinaabe people from the Creator. Here are the 5 traditional uses for the native tobacco medicine. The first traditional use for tobacco medicine is in a pipe ceremony. The pipe ceremony is typically held at the beginning of a large gathering, an event, or even a negotiation. In most pipe ceremonies, there is an offering of the pipe smoke to all 4 directions, also to the sky and to the earth, to acknowledge all 4 elements. Each person attending the pipe ceremony take their turn to either blow smoke from the sacred pipe or waft it around their body in order to ask for guidance and protection. An important thing to note is the smoke from the tobacco is typically not inhaled during a pipe ceremony. The second traditional use for the tobacco medicine is the non-smoke offering. Traditionally, dried tobacco leaves are commonly offered to the creator in a dry, unaltered form. Tobacco leaves may be placed on the ground or sprinkled near the water or placed on a rock as a way of expressing gratitude. When you offer dry tobacco leaves, it's often done in a sacred place, and it's usually accompanied by a prayer to the creator for whatever purpose that you are making that offering for. Have you ever used tobacco as a sacred medicine? If so, where? Please let us know in the comments below. Now we've looked at the first two traditional uses of tobacco as a sacred medicine, which is number one, in pipe ceremonies, and two, as a non-smoke offering. The third traditional use for native tobacco is in smoke rituals. The most common traditional use of tobacco as a sacred medicine always have to include a sacred pipe. How this is done is tobacco is sprinkled over a fire or over hot coals. My elders have told me that the smoke from the burning tobacco is a direct connection to the creator. The fourth traditional use of tobacco as a sacred medicine is as a gift to an elder. Tobacco is offered in exchange for knowledge, wisdom, or guidance, or even in exchange for other medicines or healing. If you've received guidance or healing from an elder, a spiritual leader, or a knowledge keeper, that's a good opportunity to give them a tobacco offering as a sign of gratitude. I've also been told by my grandparents that the offering and acceptance of tobacco can be considered a binding contract. Now, the fifth traditional use for tobacco as a sacred medicine is in thanks for other sacred medicines. So, along with tobacco, there are three other sacred medicines, all of which were gifted to us from the Creator and from Mother Earth. When harvesting sacred medicines, we as Indigenous people will often leave sprinkles of tobacco as an offering of thanks to the Creator and to Mother Earth for giving us those gifts. So now, after understanding these 5 traditional ways of using tobacco as a sacred medicine, you now know why this sacred tobacco medicine is so deeply important to the Indigenous culture.
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of background if you didn't have that before, and definitely something that we would be able to share with students and use that as a teaching piece as well, not just as a background knowledge for ourselves. So let's finish our acknowledgement as well. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten.
How do you use tobacco as a traditional?
Past that, there we go. So our agenda that you're seeing here is going to be very typical of any one of the grades. We just simply accommodate based on the organizing idea and the grade that we are covering. But we'll always try and give you sort of background information on the phases of learning. And for those who are with us in the pilot, some of that will be phrased very similar to what you've seen, but definitely we've added some pieces into that. And then really unpacking the concepts and the skills and procedures that we would use in the instructional components. In other words, that surface level, because the kids need the facts before we can even do anything with them. And then how does that relate to the understandings? We'll also touch a little bit on scientific and computer, scientific methods and computer science, and then provide you with some ideas for assessment, also some resources that we've been able to gather for you for this particular organizing idea. Okay, I'm just going to bring this down one here. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to get Ted to take it on from the backgrounder and share a little bit of enlightenment here.
Thank you, Chris. I'd just like to do a little bit of a backgrounder again, kind of touch bases a little bit with what happened in session one, just in case some people didn't see that. I won't spend long on it because many of you perhaps may have seen it. Anyway, I just want to just maybe point out that the potential of this new curriculum, and especially the structure, really helps us to do some things that were maybe weren't so obvious with the old curriculum. And I like to use the potential of a smartphone as an example. When we get something new, we don't know what we can actually do with it until someone shows us that potential. So I do know some people who just have that smartphone and they use it for the basic thing. They use it for a phone. They're scared to use it for anything else. Even sometimes just by showing them what else the phone can do. It is a phone and that's all they're using it for, is to call people. But we know that when we show other people what we can do on our phones, often say, hey, I want to try that, right? And you get people trying out new apps and doing different things with their phone that they didn't know their phone was capable of doing. So the more we understand the potential of an innovation, the greater we are with taking it down that road and taking those risks and trying something to get the full potential out of that innovation, whether it be a smartphone or in this particular case, maybe the curriculum we're looking at. We just take a quick look at the current curriculum, the 1996 curriculum. Just want to point out the structure of it really quickly and how it kind of compares to where we're moving to see how the potential changes somewhat. We know that in this current curriculum, there's three main chunks to the curriculum. There's the skills, attitudes, and understandings. The skills are that science inquiry and problem solving, and there's specific learning outcomes associated with that. As well, we know there's that whole page on the attitudes for that particular unit, and there are specific learner outcomes associated with that. Then again, with each unit, there are the understandings. With each understandings are the different topics. So we kind of have really specific topics within the understanding. And within there is the scientific vocabulary, the words that we use and get the kids to understand, like rocks, minerals, food chains, and so on. Now, an interesting thing is that on the very first page of that curriculum guide as well, for each grade, is a statement that says, teachers can use this, and that's the next slide, Chris. Teachers can use this curriculum to either teach it as individual units or to integrate the units and bring different parts and put them together to create a more integrated approach, and even integrate science with other subjects. So all those are potentially there at the old curriculum. The structure of it really made it hard or maybe not obvious for people to do that. And so why would we want to do that? Well, we'll go to the next slide and see the new curriculum. We know that the new curriculum is organized differently. It's got the knowledge, understanding, and skills. And if you watch the first session, we know that the knowledge and those understandings and those skills do transfer from one thing to another. And if we teach in that transfer mode, we'll find that we can use some of those organizing ideas, such as property, or not only organizing ideas, but concepts such as property or material, senses. We're going to use it not only in one organizing idea, but we're going to come back to it in other organizing ideas, and potentially other subjects. Individuals, we're all at different places along the way here. Some of us are still teaching perhaps in those topic things where we do one organizing idea, we're going to teach that and move on to the next one. Some people already see how they can integrate this with other things or other parts of their units of study. And other people are, we see that a lot in kindergarten, for example, where they take all their subjects together and they integrate the parts of them and teach them with a holistic kind of approach. We're at different spectrums, like I said, along the way, and the information that Chris and I present to you, you can take it and begin where you are. If you're still in the far left, where you're still teaching sort of in the individual topics and moving from one to the other, you can take this and at that comfort level move on. Or if you're in the middle and you are knowing how to transfer a little bit from one unit to the other, there's information to help you there. And if you're at the far end and you're already doing a lot of integrating, we have lots of information to help you with that too. So the information you have is helpful to you no matter where you are on the spectrum. We do urge that, however, we know that the 1996 curriculum was clearly stated that you could teach it as a separate unit of study. The world is different than it was, in 1996 when the old curriculum was made. We know that our world is highly integrated. We know that kids need to make sense of a complicated world. And the only way we can do that is to have those understandings that they could take out of the science room and lay it over top of the world that they're experiencing now to make sense of it. The world is changing and complex. We need to move there. And the way we do that is going to take you through the surface deep transfer phase. Go ahead, Chris. And what that really means is that we take some of those basic concepts, make sure kids understand those, and get familiar with the skills at a surface level that they're kind of independent with understanding those, put those all together to the understandings, practice applying those understandings to different contexts, and then giving students the opportunity, perhaps in a final assessment or some other activity, to transfer and use those skills and understandings and knowledge or concepts in a whole different kind of a sense. When kids are given opportunities to use those in different contexts with increasing independence, we are giving them what they need to be to make sense of their world that's forever changing and moving very quickly. So we're going to begin with that foundational piece once again, just really quickly, concepts. Remember, concepts, you can move on to the next slide, Chris. Concepts are, again, those one or two groups or categories that it's a word that's one or two words long, identifies a category such as fruit. We know that fruit is a concept, and things like a pineapple, banana, orange, apple, those are all examples of fruit because they have the attributes. They have what it needs to be considered or fall into the category or concept of fruit. And there are multiple examples of each concept. If we go to the next slide, we can also then imagine a concept as just that organizing kind of thought, right? We have a schema in our head and we connect things together. We know that pets can be animals, and animals can be birds or dogs as pets or fish, right? And we connect that all together. Concepts are like file folders that we put things. If a concept or a file folder has a name, it's kind of like a concept, and everything that has all that information in it that meets the file name, we put it into that file. And we really identify concepts when we're playing I Spy. When we're saying something that is red, we're identifying a concept with multiple examples in the room, but we're looking at one, but it has a shared attribute of something that is red. So concepts are all around us. Concepts are how we organize our world. Concepts help and view the world, and there are lots of them in the curriculum. We know that when we look at our world, that's what I mean about giving kids a sense to an opportunity to make sense of their world. The more concepts and the more integrated ideas they have with the concepts, the more they're able to look at their world and make sense out of it. So on one level, we could say this is a picture of a mountain and it's a picture of garbage. But we can also look at that picture of that mountain and say, this is a picture of human interaction in the environment, and make sense of that. We know that human interactions can have impact on the environment. In what way? So, and how did that, and students are going to start asking that question, what is the impact there? What's happening? How is that going to affect that particular environment? Is that environment fragile? And so we put all those ideas together to help kids make sense of their world. The more concepts, the more schema they have, the greater opportunities they have to really interpret what they see and understand in many different ways. As I said, concepts are flooded in the curriculum. I've highlighted some for this particular organizing idea, just a chunk of it. And you could see that ecosystems is a concept that shows up quite often. So we know that that's going to be an important one to look at. But when you use the lens of concept, you'll find that lots of other concepts pop out at you. And the next slide does that for you. We could see all kinds of concepts, and they're not only is ecosystems a concept, but so is component. An interaction is a concept. What makes an interaction? How is that different than something else that we wouldn't call an interaction? Biotic components, the abiotic components, and so on. You'll notice I highlighted some things in pink. I did that purposely because a lot of times those words are going to show up like students are going to investigate something, and in order to investigate, they have to create an investigation, and knowing what an investigation is helps them along the way. If we want the kids to answer that question, we wouldn't necessarily ask that guiding question, but we do explore the idea of complexity in an ecosystem. Well, what is complexity? So they are complex, but what is complexity? If we're going to have kids represent something, what is a representation? And if kids can understand what those concepts are, they're better likelihood of producing something that we're looking for. Next slide, please, Chris. So I created a concept map for you for grade 6 living systems. It looks really complicated, but when you do get the copy, there'll be a separate file available for you in the resource folder that will be available for you. You can read it by following the arrows, and I'll give you an example of how you can read it. I won't read through the whole thing, but when you get it, you may want to read through it because it gives you a really good overview of what this organizing idea is about. Systems was introduced in the last grade, and we're taking a look at internal systems in the human body, like the respiratory system and so on. And when we're talking about systems, there are all kinds of systems, and some systems are made up of living systems, and an ecosystem is one of those things. So you know what there are. There are different types of ecosystems, such as those listed there are the Arctic ecosystems, wetlands, and so on. And some of those ecosystems act as storage places for greenhouse gases. Ecosystems have certain characteristics, such as a geographic location, a vegetation structure, and animal populations, and a size. And so when you follow those arrows all along, it gives you a fairly good idea of what is in this particular organizing idea.
And I think further to the work that Ted's done here, again, when we reiterated that when we did the pilot sessions, but just to, really kind of hammer home the fact that the curriculum is laid out in such a way that you could almost turn it into a checklist and say, yeah, did this, yeah, did this, yeah, did this. And if you were to do that, what you're really doing is you're saying, I'm going to take all the yellows and I'm just going to do them on the map here and go, yeah, did that one. Now I'm going to go to the blues. That's the factual surface level info. And absolutely, the students need that background knowledge. But that's just getting the background knowledge. Now the real learning begins in connecting those. And so, as he said, taking these time to follow the arrows and see where these fit to each other and how they the interrelatedness and interconnectedness of them. That's the piece that we really want to get the students to, that deeper learning piece.
Thanks, Tristan. Maybe just before you go to the next slide, I was going to add on what you were saying. If you take a look in the center, you see that the ecosystem with the dark border. To the right, you'll see the pink diversity. And then further up, straight up above that, you'll see characteristics. So we know we're getting deep. We know we're getting kids to really understand things. We can ask them a question like, well, in what way do the characteristics of ecosystems contribute to diversity? Now we're talking on a whole new level, just saying, what is diversity? What is the diversity here? What are the different ecosystems? So that's what we're trying to aim for. So I've listed a bunch of the new concepts that kind of show up in pink for this one. They're not all listed there, but those are some of the major ones. Some of them that are there, such as diversity, complexity, show up once in a while, but they're part of a lot of the understandings and a lot of the key statements. And we know that things like diversity, characteristics, and so on, they're referred to quite a bit. And sometimes we use those words, so maybe pausing to help kids fully understand maybe what they mean. So we'll explore some of those, as well as take a closer, really deep dive into ecosystems and the different components. Chris has done a marvelous job of laying that out for you. But on the other side of that are some of the yellow concepts. Those are from previous grades, and those concepts keep coming up as well. Organism, just the idea of growth and survival, the environment, and relationships. And we can't talk about relationships. We're talking about in an ecosystem, we have to talk about relationships at the same time. So those are some things that were brought up and looked at in previous grades, but are certainly still a part of this organizing idea.
And just a reminder too, that because it's a spiraled curriculum, it'll be important for you to remember that you have kind of the top of the rung right now as grade 6s. So you're going to have students that are going to arrive at your doorstep without the prerequisite knowledge of that spiraled curriculum, because what they do in kindergarten now affects all the way down the chain. So wherever possible, we will give you, as Ted mentioned, some of those concepts that showed up previously that are kind of the big rocks. Also resources to help with bridging, that if you do need them, we've got them built into the slide decks as well.
This graphic is one you may have seen if you looked at session 1. Session 1 talks about this graphic, and to find it, it is in that session 1 folder. But what we've got here is a progression of the concepts for all of the organizing ideas for K-6, and gives you an idea of seeing how things flow from one grade to the next. In life skills or living systems, excuse me, for instance, we begin at grade 1 and we're talking about living things. That's where we really, kids learn this distinguishing features between plants and animals and what their needs are. What do they need to survive? In grade 2, we look in that how do the plants and animals not only survive but grow, and we look at the life cycle there, and we can move all the way up and just see the connections between grade 4, 5, and 6. Grade 5, we're looking at the internal structures of organisms and how they help an organism live and grow. And now we're taking a look at how organisms that have these internal structures depend on their environment and everything around them to grow and survive. And that's where we get the whole concept of ecosystems.
This, I'm going to say this now because it's going to come up as I show you resources as well. I found that this organizing idea has so much terminology in it. And really, if it turns into nothing more than just copy these terms down from the board or out of a book, then we kind of miss the boat. The kids need to understand them, but in a context. And so as Ted unpacks some of the different learning strategies, I think of all the sessions we've done right now in living systems, those instructional strategies to me are more important in grade 6 than they are anywhere else, just because there is so much stuff there that you need to find a way that you're going to unpack it that makes it not only engaging for the student, but that it's comprehensive enough for them to find a place that's of interest to them and still cover the curriculum.
So the way we're going to organize the rest of this presentation and the bulk of it is to move through those different phases of learning, the surface level where we learn the basic nuggets, the concepts and the skills. So look at some instructional approaches there, then some instructional approaches to help at the surface level with skills. And then we'll take a look at the deep level. And that's really where the bulk of the interaction and a lot of the resources can be helpful. Is how do we take those concepts, connect them all up and examine ecosystems through those lenses of understandings. So we're going to start with some surface level instructional approaches and give you some examples. And I should point out that what we're going to do with this part here is go through a bunch of concepts that are going to appear in this organizing idea at some point. Some of the main ones, so that some of them might be minor or brought up from previous grades. This is not meant to teach all these concepts at the front end of your course all at once. Take a look at your cusp lines and you could see, take a look at the understanding. You'll see some of the main skills there. And then take a look back at the knowledge piece and say, okay, these are the ones that I'm going to work at the surface level to get the understanding. And then when you look at the skills, for example, you'll see that kids are required to do something to demonstrate that understanding. And that's those are the things you want to make sure that they get at first. So don't do all the concepts or all the skills all at once. Do them on an as-need basis, I guess is really what I'm trying to say. We'll begin with the card sort, Chris.
The card sort is something that we had started in kindergarten in this particular organizing idea, and we've kind of followed it through with all of the grades because it really is very applicable. And I think the continuity of just using the same cards to see how those unfold is also helpful for you as the teachers. But in a card sort, really what you're doing is you can approach this a number of different ways, but you could approach it from the perspective that I need to know what they know, first of all. And because they won't have necessarily seen any of the new curriculum if you were doing it next year for the first time, even as an optional pilot. You're going to have students that are missing on some of the terminology, if nothing else, like living and non-living. We've done plants, we've done animals, we've talked about function. We've talked about basic needs. And all of these were built into card sorts where we provide them cards to students and they can sort them, which tells me as a teacher a lot of their understanding or where the gaps are, the holes are. Or I could give them some information ahead of time and then say, now, based on what I've shown you or told you or talked with you or displayed to you, here are some cards. I'd like you to sort them accordingly. So there's a number of different ways to go at this. I like to start them usually without them knowing anything because or with not necessarily, I'll back up, not me teaching them anything, because I like to know, first of all, what do they know? Because maybe they know way more than I'm giving them credit for, and I don't have to go through all of those pieces. I can hang my hat somewhere else, or they don't have the background knowledge and I need to do some filling in. So these are the cards in particular that I'm referring to right now that would be applicable for grade 6. They will be in your folder if you wish to use them. I mean, these are just ideas. But again, they have a number of plants and animals and structures on them. So they started doing this with living, non-living. I would use that same card sort for abiotic and biotic and start from there and see if the students are able to connect those. And then you could further go into that even by saying, you know, I'm going to use the cards to see how students sort them based on where those animals live. So the different habitats or ecosystems that they live in. So you're seeing here pictures of how we've used them in the past. You're getting the descriptors in the back. This is from grades 1 and 3. And so you already see that the students have seen some of these. And if people are using them consistently, then you will see that students already know them, but you're always coming at them from a different lens. You're always coming at them from same cards, but a different expectation, a different sort, a different criteria. So in grade 4, we gave them the same cards and said, can you now sort them based on the appearance? What are the external features that they have? And then you could even go into what are the external features, and then can you sort them again based on the features and what that structure does, that particular feature does, and how does that benefit? And are there common structures between animals that we would use, or common structures between plants? And then again, looking at it from a habitat perspective, what animals live in a same area? One of your outcomes in grades 3 and 4 is to make sure that students are exposed to native plants and animals from Alberta. And so those cards are specifically from animals found in Alberta, not anywhere else. That doesn't mean you couldn't do that. And in fact, that would make it a great transfer question is, I've learned about all these different animals here in Alberta. Now what? Now I'm going to pick an animal I don't know anything about, lives in a completely different part of the world. How do I take that information that I've just learned and transfer that? So again, for grade 6, it could be an application of doing it from the type of ecosystem that they believe they live in. And then asking them, why did you put them together? What are you thinking that they have in common? Or abiotic or biotic. So just some ideas, again, that you'd be able to find. Ted, do you want to talk to someone on function? Oh, you're muted.
I did it again.
No
Function
worries.
is one of those concepts that and I've got a few of them here to share with you that shows up and we'll use it, but we haven't really paused and really given the opportunity for students to really understand it. So when we talk about function of things in a system, we talk about function of the photosynthesis, we talk about function of this or that. So sometimes it's good to just take a pause and see what students do know about what function is. In this case, you can do a card sort like Chris was talking about and organize these things in a different way. And hopefully we can get them to move them into sorting things into functions. And each of those things are already sorted in functions, if you look at them carefully. But they may not be when the kids are doing it. They may sort them into other things. But you can bring it back and sort them this way and say, well, why did I sort them into the 3 groups, one on the left-hand side, one in the middle, and one on the left? What's the function of the items in those groups? And after you've done a card sort, a really useful thing might be to develop another concept. And if we can go to the next slide, Chris, I'll show you what I mean. So when Chris had you doing all those different card sorts and everything, what they were really doing was identifying a characteristic of the things in their sort. And drawing kids their attention after the sort about what they're doing and connecting what their group name is of those things that are 4-legged, we're talking about legs or the function of it. We're talking about the characteristics of things. So that's where you can add on another layer to help kids understand some of these concepts by using something called the Freyer model, which many of you may be used to. I'm going to have you just click on the maybe go to characteristic for me, the characteristic one. Right. So if we've just done the card sort, it looks something like this. So after a card sort, kids can give their responses of what it is. We give a definition to it, what a characteristic is. The key characteristics of characteristics, so that they're qualities or features, and they help us identify a certain object or thing, and they help us to describe it. And then kids, again, produce examples. What are some examples of characteristics of a dog? What are some characteristics of a shape? And having them practice identifying what characteristics are, and maybe some non-examples, because quite often we can produce non-examples that help strengthen what our understanding is. But we're not going to go through all the Freire models. There's lots of them with you. You can see if they'll be useful after you do some activity, or you can just go right ahead and create a Freire model for any of the concepts you're talking about. There's lots there that you can work at. So, and again, here's another one I've done. I've connected a Freire model after to develop the idea of system, because an ecosystem is a system. And well, what is a system? Students in grade 4 looked a close look at system with the circulatory system, respiratory system. They should have an idea of what a system is, but if not, they need to be retaught if they haven't been taught that. So this is one activity that you can use with the kids to introduce and teach the concept of system. It uses the Rube Goldberg video. So they watch it and they take a look at what function of those different parts in the whole video is, and describe the interaction that happens when that function occurs. And then students can explore and write down their thoughts and examples of systems using the connected Freire model there. And again, if you do take a look, don't go back, Chris, but under the Freire model, and I do have another one, an activity for interaction. So students will get a sense to know what function is, interaction is, components is, because components, again, are parts of this organizing idea. And we're talking about components of an ecosystem. So there's a variety of ways you can introduce these things to the students, and we're just giving you a couple ideas that might be helpful for you. And there it is.
Yep, there it is. There's
components.
A great one for just using, as Ted said, you've got examples and non-examples, and you could take a simple just a labeling of what are the characteristics of abiotic and abiotic, and you've got some videos there, but you could then turn that into a Freire model easily with the students for sure. So you've got some videos there as well that allow you to move forward, and you don't want to just direct teach what these are, which isn't my style. I like to give them maybe a book, read a story with them, or I'll give them a video. And what did you glean from those? What have you learned? What have we seen? What do we now know that we didn't know before? So just having that opportunity.
Welcome to
another surface level strategy that can be helpful for developing some concepts is something called concept attainment. Concept attainment uses very similar to a card sort, except the teacher pre-sorts them in advance in the groups that the teacher wants the students to examine. So one at a time, an example and a non-example will be presented. And all the examples will be examples of the concept. And students, by looking at the examples, find out, well, what do all these things have in common? What do all the examples have in common? And then work towards identifying a definition or an understanding of that concept. There's a lot there for you. The first ones can be very much related. The first few can be very much related to this organizing idea, because we know when we're talking about ecosystems, we are talking about relationships. And that helps identify what does it mean when we say what's the relationship between photosynthesis and oxygen that the plants breathe. What's the relationship between a plant and an animal? What's the relationship between all those things? So that introduces the idea of relationship. And again, we're looking at cause and effect and impact. That one will help you move from looking at different kinds of relationship, and this particular one, a cause and effect relationship, but it also kind of introduces kids how to build a concept map as well, which is a really wonderful and powerful way for kids to demonstrate their understandings. Dependence and diversity, those are all ones that will show up very often. And the bottom few are there because they're going to show up when we do investigations. Investigations is part of scientific methods, but we'll see that scientific methods doesn't live as its own organizing idea. It's kind of integrated along the way into the organizing ideas. So when we do an investigation, there's some concept attainment lessons to help kids understand what investigation is, conclusion, analysis, criteria, because we use criteria in a lot of investigations. We compare and contrast, prediction, observation. If kids don't know what they are, those are good ways to introduce those concepts at a need be level, right? For those particular concepts. Another way to introduce kids with some with concepts is using a spectrum sort. And really what students do is they put things on a spectrum, or whatever you put on the spectrum, students put ideas on there and have to justify it. So if I wanted to see what students knew about, if they understood the term complexity, because ecosystems do have complexity, then we could do something like what's on the next page here, which shows you an idea of what a spectrum sort looks like. So we've got low complexity on one end, high complexity on another one, and just ask kids, where would you put, and without talking about what complexity is, they might have an idea, but where would you put a stone, an animal, and a plant on that spectrum of complexity? Low complexity, high complexity, somewhere in the middle. How about hopscotch or jogging or basketball? And when students explain why they put it there, what you'll find they're going to start talking about the concept. What is complexity? I put a stone maybe on low complexity compared to an animal or plant because, and they'll start talking about what makes them complex in their mind. And then you can start working towards a definition of, well, what is complexity? And then once you do that, then again, there's another Freire model where they can record their thoughts about what complexity is, create more examples and non-examples, because complexity is one of those words that can show up quite a bit during this organizing idea. You can do that with lots of concepts, and helps kids to really, you can use it as a pretest even to help kids know what they know about certain concepts or certain things. Skills and procedures. Those are those things in the far right-hand column. They're the doing verbs. And when you look across that column, like I said, you can see what concepts are going to be important by looking at the knowledge and skills and understandings. And that skills and procedures one is really there for kids to use that skill to demonstrate what they know in terms of the concepts, or demonstrate what they understand in terms of that middle piece, the understanding piece. So if we're going to be using skills and procedures, we need to make sure at the surface level that kids know what that skill is and have had practice doing it before we say demonstrate your learning using whatever skill or procedure is identified there. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll see what they are. For this particular organizing idea, the word investigate is used. We're going to talk about a controlled experiment briefly, and because that's one of the things that kids are expected to do with this organizing idea. Kids are asked to represent, to relate, to compare and contrast, examine, and discuss. So before they get them to do any of those things to demonstrate their understanding, we need to pause and at the surface level say, well, what does it mean to compare and contrast? Let's do some examples and not worry about comparing and contrasting things related to the organizing idea if they've never compared and contrasted before or seem to have trouble doing it. We'll want to make sure they have a good handle on it at the surface level. Then we move into deep. Then we could say, okay, now use compare and contrast to demonstrate your understanding about something. So there's a variety of ways we can do that. And I just listed them all here again, just to show you an example of where they're located. And just again, the definition of skills and procedures is that what students do to demonstrate their knowledge. So students need to be able to compare in order to demonstrate. They need to design, how do you design and perform a controlled experiment? We're not they'll want some doing that beforehand before they're gonna do that for you in this organizing idea. And so that's where these things happen in the surface level. I want to talk a little bit about computer science and scientific methods a little bit. We saw the word investigate. That's a scientific methods skill. We'll kind of take a look at that on the next slide. But there are also some things at grade, we can go back to that first slide, Chris, that's okay, the one that you were on previously. Because there's some similar things happening with computer science and scientific methods. Sorry, I don't have the grade 6 listed there. But at the end of the day, computer science and scientific methods are really skill-based organizing ideas. In other words, the things that the kids learn in those grades are expected to move up. So at grade 2, K-2, the focus of computer science is on instructions. When they move into grade 3, there's a whole notion of computational thinking and components of computational thinking, like taking things apart or analyzing a problem in a different way. What they learn in grade 3, they're expected to continue to apply computational and creative thinking at grade 4, but adding on design process. And there are design processes. In other words, how do we go to make a design? How do we make a product going through a design process? And there are steps. And then in grade 5, they look at, well, using the design process and computational thinking to make artifacts or do things to meet human needs. And that's where kids are starting to code in grade 5. In grade 6, we move into some more things with coding, but taking a look at the idea of abstraction when it comes to making design and design thinking and making artifacts, and then taking a look at the positive, negative impacts of technology. So all those things are brought forward, and we'll talk about how that will get unpacked later on at the end of this presentation. Same thing with scientific methods. I just want to point out, not messages, scientific methods. I want to point out on that slide, that the next one, that in grade 2, the steps for investigation are listed there. They're not listed in grade anywhere else. And if you take a look at your grade 6, you will not see it there. You'll see a lot of talk about scientific methods in grade 6 is talking about explanations. And when you take a look at the steps in grade 2, explanations really are part of that last step, discussing observations, conclusions, talking about your explanations. So the whole process of investigation is identified in grade 2. You'll have to go back there, and then you can see how some of those concepts such as analyzing, conclusions, predictions are associated with that. Grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5 build on certain steps. Grade 3 really builds on the idea of data. Grade 5 really builds on the data and using data to create evidence, which is really what your conclusions are. And then, of course, grade 6 focuses on the explanation part. So it's all kind of interconnected. One way to teach those skills, especially things like investigating or comparing, contrasting, is sometimes it's best to lay it out. We're going to compare and contrast today. Here's a way we can do this. So we're going to investigate. When you conduct an investigation, here's the skills. But there's a procedure that kind of you can go through that will help lay it out for you a little more piecemeal in a step-by-step process. And there's some examples there for you that you can click on when you have that chance. And Venn diagrams are another useful way to compare and contrast. And Chris, I believe you have a couple examples there.
Yeah, I haven't got ones directly for grade 6, not that it couldn't be used here, but what I did put in is ones from previous. But research tells us that of all the things that we do put in front of students as far as instructional strategies or ways for them to demonstrate their understandings, the Venn diagram is one of the most powerful, because a student can't do that at all. They can't even entertain a starting point with a Venn diagram or a compare and contrast if I'm just got 1 or 2 bits of information. So if I live just in the knowledge world and that's all I kind of work with is just the surface level info, they're going to have a tough time doing this kind of work because they haven't had the work in making the deliberate connections. And that's the important part. So we've actually been using them for quite a while, but hula hoops make great Venn diagrams. You can get the kids out of their seat for 1 and 2. They can get on the floor. You can give them their cards or their titles or their whatever words you want to give them. And then they can start to sort them. And this is from grade 1, where they're doing basic needs of plants and animals. And for them to determine, are there common needs of plants and animals in that centerpiece? So again, you don't get that in isolation. That needs to be something that they start to make those connections where I need food, I need air, I need water. Those are all things, whether I'm a plant and I'm not running around, so no movement, versus an animal that there is running around, so there is movement, but we still share all of this in common. This is a very great way too, I find as a teacher, to go in and see what the student's understanding is, because regardless of how they put it together, it's that, can you explain to me why you put things where they are, so that you can get that understanding of what they're thinking or not thinking, right? Where are the gaps in thinking? So again, it's a great assessment tool that we can use. And you can use this in a variety of different ways. And in this one, you could talk about comparing different ecosystems. You could do it comparing different differences between plants and animals that use sun energy. Like there's just so many different ways that you could attack this. Or if you have the students working in groups and each one is taking a different area of interest or a different ecosystem and the organisms, that they would set one up and then they would use that for a pre-teach to the rest of their students in the class. So again, it has the potential of being so many things. Okay, back to you, Ted.
So the knowledge pieces help us build the concepts that are used in the understandings, because we know, if we go to the next slide, the understandings are really statements that string together those concepts that we learn in the knowledge part of the curriculum. If you're able, and this graphic is there to show that when we get to the understanding part, that's where we're talking about the deep learning, that those concepts which are represented by the individual squares are linked together to create an understanding, and we layer that over a certain context. Could be different ecosystems or an understanding in different environments and so on. And skills, again, they're taught at that surface level, but then used once they're good at the skill, they use those skills to demonstrate their understanding at the deep level. And there are 3 understandings, I believe, at this organizing idea at grade 6. And they're listed there. We're going to show you how that works. And once again, just a reminder that the understanding is how those facts, those concepts fit together in a logical format. And that's why I've highlighted them there, because we know that, for example, if we take components, characteristics, an ecosystem, and diversity in organisms, we create the understanding that components and characteristics of ecosystems affect the diversity and the organisms that live in it, in that particular ecosystem. So that's how the understandings work. And Chris has got some marvelous resources to help move us through these understandings, and some really great context where kids can explore these understandings.
And I just want to point out to you that if you have your newest version of the numbered outcomes, you know, it feels like we've seen everything a million times and you just have not got any errors anymore, but we do. Found this one last night, that there are 2 1.2s. So just go in there and physically change yours to 1.3. We will repost a newer version of it so that we catch these, but those are the little things that unfortunately we catch as we go through. But there are 3 understandings, not 2. So did you want to talk about discussing first before I go through a bunch of
I'm getting on again. There's some strategies that are really helpful at to help with the deep, but discussing is one of them. And we know discussing is not just and you'll see discussing show up in the skills and procedures. Just take the time to talk about discussing, what it is. There's multiple ways to get to have kids practice discussing, and that's the next slide. You may want to have a checklist handy and organize kids into some kind of these discussion formats, and give them some feedback, not on everybody all at once, of course, but choose a couple kids at a time, because the better kids are at discussing, the better they're going to be able to articulate their understanding or demonstrate what they know and understand. Same with representation. It's another powerful tool for students to demonstrate what they know, especially those who may have a hard time writing out their understandings. And there's the slide shows a bunch of possible ways for students to represent their understanding in different and multimodal ways. So take some time maybe to, again, at the surface level, if you're going to get them to make a podcast, you want to make sure to hear, well, what's a good podcast? How are you going to use a podcast to represent what you know? If you're going to do a concept map, what's a concept map? How do you make one? Let's practice making some so that they're good at making a concept map or a podcast or a diorama before they use that to demonstrate their understanding. They're powerful tools.
Okay. When we look at the first understanding, we're really looking at ecosystems, and students need to know, and we're going to go back to surface level. What is an ecosystem? They've talked about diversity before this in previous grades. It's definitely highlighted here as a concept, but it wouldn't be new to them in a perfect world if they were all arriving at your doorstep with all the background knowledge, because they talked about interconnectedness already of organisms. So it's a way for them to further their understandings now and put those into how does diversity within an ecosystem affect the organisms that live in it. We could do a compare and contrast. We could use the Venn diagram. You could do a lot of different things, but first I need to go through and find those ecosystems and find the organisms that live in there. What do they have in common? Why are they all living in that same ecosystem? Is there something there that they share that would be of value to them? You want to talk about this one, Ted, before we move forward?
For sure. And you could take those skills and procedures statements what the skill procedure statement is simply stated, compare the characteristics to ecosystems, but you can use that to develop that understanding that's associated with it that you can see written there, and have kids making sure that when they do this, then to say, well, how does this, our comparison contrast demonstrate that understanding that the components and characteristics of ecosystems affect the diversity? And they would use the particular examples of the two contexts that they investigated, the two ecosystems, to explain that. So comparing and contrasting can help support students to demonstrate and to develop those understandings.
So what you'll have now is a number of different slides, but again, use them as you see fit as to how you're going to lay out this particular organizing idea, and when you're going to work through it with the students, what approaches you're going to use. So again, you've got a number of different opportunities here. I like using case studies. Case studies for me sometimes are really revealing. Again, it's kind of like the card sort. Right, I could just read a story. I could read this book called The Right Environment, and just read it to the students with them knowing nothing about ecosystems. And as we're going through this book, hopefully they're picking up some of the key pieces that really we're actually wanting them to learn in the organizing idea, and then unpacking that learning with them at the end so that they start to see it. Or another way to use these, a case study of that approach with the book, is give them 3 short books where they could read all of them. And what are they finding? You could do a chart, much like what Ted just showed you, but you could do a chart that says, what does each of these books show us? But there's some unique features that are very different in each one as well. And so they start to unpack some of this, as opposed to just sort of a stand-up deliver, here's all the characteristics of an ecosystem, where they're just copying it down and not really, they're not really engaged in it or being able to really think through and make some comparisons of their own. So again, characteristics of an ecosystem. I've got a number of different slides that you could use. This would be another way that you could start it off. You could just show them pictures. Don't teach me about each one of them first. Just show me the pictures. What do we notice that's the same? What do we notice that's different? Are there any similarities? And what conjectures could we make about what what lives here and what could not live here? So again, it's just getting them to articulate what they already know about these. And calendars, I will say to you, calendars are one of the best. If you're looking for having just pictures up on the wall and getting kids to start putting some of this is what's the commonalities between them. Calendars are one of the best places to get those great pictures from, because you can just laminate them and put them up. So I could see in any one of these, I could talk about climate, I could talk about patterns that I see, I could talk about vegetation, I could talk about the animal populations and make comparisons between them. What do I see for the characteristic? Well, one is definitely aquatic. One of them has water. It's a swampy area. One of them has no swamp, no water. Well, there's a creek running through it. But again, they have some things that are in common and things that are very, very different. So it's just talking about where would I find those? And not every child has traveled the province of Alberta. They may only know the ecosystem that they live in, right? That's what they're familiar with. So even going outside for a walkabout outside in your schoolyard, depending on where your schoolyard is situated, or if you have options to get out to where there's a bush or something, where the kids can actually get down and notice that there's an ant crawling, and notice that there's a beetle, and noticing that there's different kinds of leaves and whatever. This is an opportunity for them to start connecting some of the pieces and start building what they believe to be the ecosystem that they're living in, and what kind of animals did they see there. I've given you a number of different videos as well that if you want to unpack them, again, I wouldn't necessarily show all of these, because it isn't about memorizing that the Arctic has this and the ecosystem of the desert looks like that. Maybe this is where they start using this as a comparison. So we've unpacked together a particular ecosystem, and that's one that I have a suggestion for. And then maybe I want to take that ecosystem that we learned together as a class and compare it to another one. And that's where students could have choice. Maybe they get to pick which one of these they want to, and then they do a presentation, or they do a, whether it's an infographic, something that they would present what their learnings were in comparison. Different ways to come at this particular organizing idea for sure. Photosynthesis is another one. We're not getting deep into Bio 20 and Bio 30 and Chem 20. Science 20 for photosynthesis, but they do need to know something about how plants make their own food and what's the driving factor, the sun, and how does that work? Like what happens? So yes, they do need to know that there's water being broken down and sugar being made. Like they need to understand that. They don't need to get into the chemical formulas of it, but they need to understand the basics of that and how that works. And then we could even ask, are plants and animals the same in that regard? No, well, animals don't make their own food, plants do, but we do use plants for food, right? So then again, the energy that's within a plant is something that we talked about in a previous grade. Now that supports a food chain and a food web, that flow of energy that students would see. So case studies for me are that personally, I do like using them because I'm not a stand up and deliver person. So I do like to have options where I can either start from nobody knows anything and we find out what they know in reading, or we give them stations that they can go to and there's a certain piece that they would read, whatever. There is a book, a nice book that I found that fits very well with this current curriculum, grade 6. Called Photosynthesis, and when the author is in here as well, but I've also given you all these where you can order it from. It's a Pearson resource. It also is from the Teacher Created Materials, and those are excellent books, I have to say. I have a number of them coming this way, so I'm just going through and culling to see which ones fit and which ones don't. Again, we can talk about why is photosynthesis so important? Why did I call it life-giving air? Why was that a link to photosynthesis? And again, it's that process of they take in our waste, which is carbon dioxide, and they give us what we need, which is oxygen. So it's that reciprocal environment and a reciprocal cycle that we want to have happen. So these are just some slides. Again, you're welcome to use whatever you like here if that works for any of them. Just a general overview of how photosynthesis might get unpacked with students, and that they understand that carbon dioxide comes in and that we're going to be releasing oxygen. But it gets much more specific. I do have some that really let them actually see what the stomata in a leaf look like. Where does the carbon dioxide actually plant? Like, how does it get past this leaf? Seems like it's really waxy and I don't even know how that works. There's a video and it's an excellent video if they've never seen that before. What are roots for, right? We have roots anchored to the ground, but they are. And so how does that change? Parts of the plant. They had a little bit of that work already in previous grades where they talked a bit about plants and the components were plant, but they don't get into a lot of specifics there. So talking about the leaf, talking about the roots, talking about the importance of how things travel inside. So we talked about xylem in the last unit, 5. So how do the nutrients reach the different parts of the plant? So again, our pieces that you're feeling the students are really not yet in the know, then you go back to the grade 5 folder and grab whatever you need there as well. But I do have a number of them built into this one for you because I kind of figure that you're going to need some of that as a for sure. This is the when I was talking about where it really does give the in-depth view with electron microscope showing how those openings look. What does it look like inside a leaf? How do things transfer and move on? So again, 2 really good videos here that you might be able to use. And a video could be treated like a case study, right? It could be show me the video and now what did I learn? And now show me another video. What an additional pieces did I gain from that? So again, it doesn't have to be always, I'm going to teach it to you. Now we're going to follow it up with a video. We can unpack it that way. So these are the pieces that we definitely want the students to know. They don't need to know the formula for glucose and any of those, but they know that it comes in with carbon dioxide. I need to create sugars and oxygen. So again, we've got a number of different ones here. We talk about all different ways that the plants create and use sunlight. So that's one that you can use. In this case, just some suggestions. You could have represent and looking at connections or relate, if we want to use that word. Any one of those 3, as far as I'm concerned, kind of fit together between components of 2 ecosystems. Compare the 2 ecosystems. Maybe use the chart that Ted showed you first, and we pick a new one that we haven't even seen before. What do they find? And they could use words to describe it. They could use a table. They could do graphing, tied into math right off the bat. They could do photographs of the different components of an ecosystem that they've been studying, and they could go from there. What does Wacotowin have to do with an ecosystem and diversity? And if you're not sure, you need to look up the word Wacotowin and what it means, and how do the First Nations peoples see Wacotowin in everything that they are doing. So those are, again, ways that we can link the Indigenous outcomes that are in there to a way of seeing. So I've also found some other resources. I have highlighted some of these in the past. These are graphic, they're not graphic novels, graphic science books. And kids like them because they're graphic and they have the little characters and they're talking, and it's always the superhero Max Axiom who goes through. But what they do is they unpack a concept, and in this case, they unpack ecosystems in a really, really deep way for the kids. And we've used it in classrooms before. These are all from Capstone Publishing, and I would recommend them. They're really good books. They're appropriate for 4, 5, 6. They're not appropriate for K3. Again, synthesis, it talks about that, and it gets even a little bit more specific than what we're looking for. And because some of the things that they might be talking about lead to or could prevent or enhance global warming, I've also included that one in here as well. So Capstone Publishers are the ones who look after this particular series. An investigation, as Ted mentioned earlier, an investigation is a pretty powerful way, and they're really asking them to design. I almost want to say maybe more investigation. But in some of the research that I found for resources, there was one in particular that I really liked, because not only addressed all of the design questions that we could put forward to students, but it actually stepped them through a lot of the thinking that would attach that surface level and make connections for them as they're working through the activities, the investigations, and move them into sort of a deeper thinking in order for them to be able to transfer that to learning. So in this particular one is, how do the components and characteristics of ecosystem affect the diversity of organisms that live in it? That's your understanding. But this actual resource here meets every skill that was identified in LS 6 1.1, except modeling. That's the only one. And in meeting those activities and those skills, every activity takes you through your entire unit of comparison of ecosystem. This is quite a little resource. It's about 14 pages long. It is broken down into a number of different categories and different investigations, but it also provides lots of lesson background material for both you, the teacher, and the student. So it's one that I was really impressed. I think would be a really good match for us here. And then again, looking at the third one, there are significant relationships between plants and animals. That's a great one for the hula hoops. We've already started that once with the students, but there's another one that they could definitely look at. In that one I was just referring to, they even say, take the students outside, get them magnifying glass, put them hand and knee on the ground and let them crawl around and see what they see, and let them start to record and what kinds of connections are they making with this ecosystem, and then take them somewhere else and do the same thing. So it's just really letting the kids be the scientists and working their way through. So again, it's that case study approach. Could be a very, very first time they ever see it. If I was going to do this unit again with students, I would use wetlands as my case study to do with all the students. I would unpack beautiful wetlands, which is done here in Alberta. It's a series. It's done through the Indigenous lens, and it's found under the resources of Sacred Relationships. I have all the links for you, but they have basically completed everything that we would normally have done, just grade 5 wetlands before. Whoops, I think I went one too far there. Nope. And in the unpacking of the wetlands, it would give me an opportunity to model what it means to do an investigation. It would give me an opportunity to model what it means to take information in a case study and create a Venn diagram, or sorry, a compare and contrast. So many different things could be done through just that one study. And then I can say, all right, as a team, we have learned about wetlands. We've learned about all the components. We've also integrated the First Nations beliefs of water and all of the 4 sacred plants. All of this is in within these particular sections. And now I'm in a position to say to them, is there another ecosystem that you would like to study on your own? And let them pick to find what's interesting. So here are the pieces that are in here. The website is already set up. The lessons are created for you. I'm not suggesting you would use them all, but they are done through the Indigenous lens, and you will have lots of videos where elders will be speaking about the different components of that particular lesson. And it's a combination of both sort of social studies, thinking about what's in a story, what do we mean by a sacred relationship, which kind of goes back to grade 5. Why do the people feel that the land is so important? And then again, here are the pieces that I would be unpacking that are specific to what we're studying here in grade 6. So powerful pieces are available to you that you have access to. There is a circle of life as well, and we actually in the grade 5 video we used the medicine wheel as our component to look at what is health, what is wellness, what is important, what directions, what are the meanings of the plants. Here's another one again where you see them as the circle of life being unfolded, which again the 4 different plants are also indicated in here. We talked about those, and again I've just given you a medicine wheel showing also the 4 sacred plants and where they typically go in direction. Although I will say that you have to know your location and your culture and beliefs well, because they are not all going to be the same. They will not always in every medicine wheel have the same colors, nor will they put the plants in exactly the same location. So you do have to do a little bit of legwork to find out where you are living, what the beliefs are. And an elder will help you with that. A knowledge keeper will help you with that. Not a problem. But I've given you a number of different slides here. This is a picture of sweetgrass. I've given you some information about sweetgrass if you're not familiar with it. I've also given you the one when we talk about sage and where do I find it. Sage grows wild in Alberta, and we can certainly go and harvest it at any time.
Park in Manitoba.
But again, it's an opportunity for students to even know what it's about. Native tobacco, we talked about that. That's the same video that you were talking about. And then I've also included for you 4 books that come from the Native Reflections. They're called the Grandmother Grandfather series. And these are 4 books that are really written for Div 1, but I've used them even in junior high because the information that's in them, it doesn't matter what the word is in there, but the information is really powerful on the 4 sacred medicines. So again, those are just things that I offer to you as possible resources that you might want to look at. And so sacred relationships, it really do get into the heart of the matter of what we're doing in grade 6. They talk about those deep pieces. They talk about the connections. They talk about the links that we need for the First Nations within our curriculum. So it's a kind of a one-stop shop for that. I think I've got that in there twice, sorry. And then other resources that you might want to consider: how do plants and animals need each other? This is a great, again, another place for comparison. And then plants and animals in the ecosystem. This was done by the BC government for their ministry. Again, an excellent one where just compares just common everyday plants and animals for ecosystems. You could use that as extra information. You could just not use it. I'm just trying to give you as much as we can. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Ted, and we're just going to finish up here with a little bit of a discussion on assessment.
Yeah, we'll be quick. We're moving. We're running out of time here. So assessment is similar to what we've been doing in the past. We want to look at observations, what the kids are doing when we want to have those conversations and look at their products. And the bulk of our assessment is going to be using that triangulation to do that formative assessment, both at the surface level and the deep level. In other words, what do they know about the concepts? Can they provide examples, non-examples of the particular concepts? Are they good at the skills? And then once we see them demonstrating that, we move into the deep and check out their understanding. Giselle, using different contexts that, for example, Chris provided, applying those understandings in the different ecosystems and using that as the context to continue the formative assessment and finally give them a summative assessment at the end, which is essentially a transfer assignment. So we want to know, they make sure they know the concepts and the understandings, and are good at the skills they can use in their transfer activity for that assessment piece. We can use if you go to the next slide really quickly, we can use the skills and procedures statements as assessments, but you'll notice they have a bright red color, new contexts. If you don't give kids a new context for them to work with, it's probably just going to be a knowledge recall. For example, if you, in the middle of the sheet or the middle of the page there, you see examine the diversity of animals and plants in various ecosystems in relation to the abiotic components. If you just ask that question based on a study you guys did that we did together as a class, then we're working at a surface level, right? If you give the students a new context and have them examine it and report back to you in that new context, now you're getting to the deep level where they're demonstrating understanding. So same with representing and connect the biotic and abiotic components of an ecosystem. You want to make sure you give them a new context and say, looking at this ecosystem or this video, make a representation that shows that connection between those. So that's just the key with skills and processes. I highlighted that one because they locate and examine the local ecosystem. That could be a surface level thing as well, but we can bunk it up together again into maybe even a transfer, a final summative assessment, because the learner outcome is that students investigate the characteristics and components and interactions within ecosystems. Well, it may give them an investigation problem. And again, working through those steps of the scientific method begins with a problem: which ecosystem has greater diversity, a schoolyard or a pond? And using what they know and learned, and it could be a comparison and contrast to come up with a conclusion to that investigation. So that's just one example. Again, you may want to use or not use depending on your circumstance there. Next slide, please, Chris. Really talk about scientific methods. We've alluded to it. There are going to be separate sessions on the different scientific methods for each grade. So grades 1 to 6. They'll be made available soon. They'll have examples of how to introduce some of the concepts associated with it, and hope with some examples of how you can integrate it. It would be helpful to go back and look probably at those earlier grade ones, especially grades 2, 3, 4, 5, because as I said, there's the building kind of nature to it. So if you just look at the grade 6 one, you may not get everything you need to fully appreciate what's expected for scientific methods at grade 6. Similar with, and we're lucky we have Nicole Lamoureux, who's going to be presenting those things, and there'll be recordings made available to you so you can help you with your planning. Same with computer science, Chris, right?
Yep, computer science will do the same. We have engineering and we have actually a couple that are additional people that are helping us out as well, who are going to create some of those pieces, especially as we get into the Div 2, with the coding and not familiar with that, don't know what to do with it. And we'll come in and give you sort of some practical everyday examples for, let's say, living systems in grade 6. So she'll make it very specific about what you can do, and we'll put those into the folder for grade 6 for living systems if it's specific to your grade. If it's a general piece that they're just showing you that in coding, this is the kind of thing that you would do, but it's not really linked specifically to any grade, we'll put those all in the session 1 opener. So you'll have to keep checking back and watching for those folders as they start stacking up into either your specific grade or into the general one at the beginning. So everything that you have here, I'm not going to go through these at any particular Sparklebox. We did a skeleton build yesterday, but they have so much on ecosystems. This is a great math science. It's a royalty free, so you're able to access it. But again, there's a whole bunch here that I'm just going to mention to you that they exist. These also come from the previous grade. So wherever I felt something in what they did there may help with the ecosystems or the comparative analysis, if you're going to do that between plants and animals, I've included that in here, and it's going to be fun. So you have lots of additional resources. You may not need them all, and you may find that, I'm just going to ignore all those, but you may want some of the additional ones because kids have the bridging knowledge. So you'll have to make that determination based on sort of your opening couple of sessions that you have with them, where they're at, or whatever you start with, right? Whatever maybe you're starting with a book to get a case study to see what they know, or a card sort to see what they know. So these also are videos from Sacred Relationships in here, but these are also built into the other one that I shared with you as well. All right, so let's carry on here. And lastly, there is a scoring rubric here that was created in Ontario, and it is specific to science. So we're just offering it as if you're just starting out new and you want something, maybe you're as a division, you might want to use this so that you're all using sort of a common assessment piece. Again, it's not a must do. It's just if you're looking for something, you might want to have a look at this one. If not, then you're good to go. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll address some of the questions that we have coming up here as well.